Hi everyone, I'm Cadet Johanna Western, your Professional Development Training Officer, and this is Aircast. This week we will be discussing the United States Air Force Academy virtual seminars that they had over the days in October and November. And today we have Cadet Ryan Hagan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
So what is your job in the wing this semester?
This semester, I am the Recruitment Squadron Commander. Essentially, my responsibilities are recruitment efforts, as well as I oversee the public affairs team. So anything with social media, taking pictures. Basically, we're part of the Memory Maker group.
Sweet. The first question, what was your virtual seminar about? I know we attended different ones, so I know what we learned and what topics were covered were completely different.
So essentially, my PDT focused on what it means to serve in the Air Force and why different individuals serve, and talking about how that kind of is implemented into the different core values and kind of how the Air Force, their vision as well. So
yeah,
I don't know.
My PDT was completely different. Obviously, I had, I think, 4 that I attended, and they all talked about certain aspects of being in the Air Force and different ways to help. So one that I had was leader of character, then others was like living honorably, elevating performance, and then the final one was like resiliency, which obviously is a very hard topic. But overall, I learned so much from them. So you obviously had the one seminar. What were your 3 main takeaways from your online seminar?
So my top 3 is, the first one was definitely the gravity of commitment. So they talked a lot about how this is a volunteer force. So other countries, it's more of like a draft, but us, it's you raise your right hand, and it's not so much you're just kind of looking for another job. But the gravity of that commitment is you are volunteering for something bigger than yourself. So you're volunteering for responsibility where you're putting basically your country first. So that was my first big takeaway. My second one was understanding the core values is easy, but actually living them is a challenge. So it's easy to read something. It's easy to spit out information that you've read in either a field training manual or some handbook, but actually to live them and make that yours is where it becomes the challenge.
Yeah, my seminars also talked about the core values, but when we learn them as JMC, it's just information that we're supposed to almost recite back and say it verbatim because it's just a thing we have to know. I feel like this also showed how important it is to actually live by these core values. So I think that was definitely very interesting when they talked about that stuff, because they didn't just sit there and you're like, oh, you need to know this. They actually expanded to the why. You talked about the core values and how yours was expanded upon that. I had one of the leaders that was leading our WebEx. It was Rich Wright, and he talked about how we need to embody those 3 core values. But he also talked about 9 core values, which was really strange to me. And he talked about how you need to be honest and have courage and also accountability. And there's so many other ones. I have to look it up again. And then he just said how they're so important, even though you need to know those 3 already, but you have to expand upon it to make sure you're a better leader for your people.
Yeah, I'm sure over the years, especially with someone as much experience as they have had, us just being cadets, we've learned so much within the last 4 years being senior cadets. There's a lot of other things that we live by, especially like accountability. It's not particularly in the core values per se, explicitly, but we obviously live by that. Accountability is key. And then as the other ones you mentioned as well, those are other things that we live by, even though it's not explicitly mentioned within those 3. So I can definitely see expanding it being important to the mission itself. So
I agree. But some 3 main takeaways I had were the one, which I thought was interesting and I never really thought about it, was having energizing dialogue, which sounds like a really weird thing to have, but I realized how important it is, because if you talk to somebody who has a flat tone, just does not sound like they want to be there, you really don't want to listen to them or follow them because it sounds like they're not even interested in their job. So that was one thing I thought that was really important after thinking about that. Another one that we're talking about is how a culture can affect your team's performance, which I never even thought about how that could even be a thing. So it was important that he talked about that because it shapes people's values and underlying assumptions. So their culture is the reason that people might have these values or assumptions, which if you don't know people's culture, then you're not going to be able to fully get how the team will work and perform. And the final takeaway I had was grit. He talked about how it can change over time and what adversaries come your way. Kind of going into the adversaries, he expanded upon how adversaries can be seen in a negative light, but it's actually good for your growth and development to become a leader. Because most times you hear adversaries, it's oh no, it's a foe, it's bad, it's not good, but it actually can help your grit and become a better leader.
Yeah. So the first topic that you mentioned about, I actually have personal experience with. When I first came into the program, especially as a 100, especially as a 200, other people, they viewed me as someone who just did not want to be there. I didn't have that kind of voice that you were talking about. So everyone assumed that I had no motivation and that I just wanted to be somewhere else, but that was actually the opposite. I really enjoyed the program and I really enjoyed being there. But because I didn't have that voice and because I didn't inflect myself in that sense, everyone else assumed that I was just unmotivated. So that's definitely something important that I've learned previously and that I love that your PDT hit on in particular.
Yeah, I thought it was so weird. I was like, how is this even relevant to being a leader? And then he continued to talk about how, oh, see how I'm talking normal and monotone, see how boring it is? And I was like, oh my gosh, it sucks when he was talking like that. And then he started changing his tones and stuff. And then like kind of how in our briefs, we always talk about how we need to have more inflection and more energy in our briefs to make sure that people stay engaged and it just sounds better. And now that makes so much more sense. Basically said, this helps you be a leader. This helps you get people engaged to listen to you, especially as a leader. You need your people to listen to you because if not, you're not going to get anything done. Next question. There was a quote from one of my seminars that I wrote down. It was by Paul Hoffman. I think he was your PDT virtual seminar leader too, correct? Yeah. He said, we are not engaged in just another job. We are practitioners of the profession of arms. What does this mean to you?
So this actually brings me back to the first really key takeaway that I had, which was kind of the gravity of commitment, which was you're volunteering for something bigger than yourself. It's not something that other people can do. We are kind of unique in that sense in that we really have a responsibility to not only us and the people that we are leading, but also the entire country in itself.
Yeah. For me, I think of it just not everybody can come and do our job, just like you said. It takes so much time for people to do it. And like you said, it's a volunteer force. So not everyone's just going to be like, I'm going to go sign up. They have to want to do this, and it's how they get there. When he said we're a practitioner of the profession of arms, the profession of arms has those core values, and we're practicing those core values. So it's not just a job where you clock in 9 to 5 and you go out and you leave. We have that 9 to 5, plus we're going to keep our core values and everything that we stand for outside of our job. Because some people can definitely lose those morals in that way of life once they go leave the job. They're like, oh, I'm going to go do whatever. We can't do that. That's just not how we are. So it's super important that we're just not like everybody else. We're different, basically. For a few of my seminars, there was a lot of talk about owning and pursuing your identity. What does that mean to you?
Developing your own personal identity, especially in a professional sense, this is good because you kind of can create your own culture. And if you have a unique culture within your kind of organization, that can really help your subordinates because they have their own identity and they can really take pride in that. So taking pride in the work that you do and the organization for which you work for is huge for motivation.
When I think of like owning your identity, I think of you can't blame your decisions, how you talk and everything like that on somebody else, especially if they don't like it. You can't be like, oh, so-and-so said to do that. Like you can't do that. You have to own up to what you are and how you run things because that's who you are as a person. So it's important to make sure that you stand by yourself and what you stand for because if not, then people are going to lose faith in you because you're not even confident in yourself and who you are. So it's important that you trust yourself and you keep with who you are. And then with pursuing your identity, you don't want to stay stagnant because if you stay the same as you were from like elementary school, we'd all be children. We wouldn't be acting the same as we do now. So that's where I think that grit and adversity comes into play when he talked about it in my one seminar because adversity basically makes you grow as a person even though it may not be your favorite thing because nobody wants to face adversity head on. So when you do, it does make you grow and kind of teaches you how you handle certain situations. Kind of like when we went through FTP, we were getting elevated tone. We had to learn how we would react, and that was our own identity because everybody reacted differently.
And I think that's one of the amazing things about just like RGC and kind of training in general is they throw adversity at you and seeing how both you react to it and how your teammates act to that, that's really where you're able to grow because if you don't have that grit or resiliency, then you're not going to be able to take that.
Yeah. Resiliency helps your identity grow just like grit does and adversity. All that stuff helps you become a better person and transform you into a better leader for your people. A lot of my seminars, there were quite a lot of breakout rooms where you ended up talking to cadets from different detachments. In what way did that help you reflect what you learned from your webinar?
Well, going back to actually being able to listen to other people's perspectives, from the first question, the webinar was really based around what it means to be in the Air Force. And there's a lot of individuality to that. Every person who joins the Air Force, they raise their right hand for a different reason. So being able to listen to that person's reason and a variety of different person's reasons, especially it being a webinar and for it being people from across the country, it was amazing, really eye-opening to see what the reasons are behind that.
It's kind of like when you go to FT and you meet everybody from different detachments. They all have different ways of leading and acting. So those breakout rooms really help bring some insight and almost help everybody else grow to be better leaders, which I think obviously was the whole point of all these seminars. So our next question deals with this model of practice for habits through thoughts and actions. My virtual seminars were definitely talked about a lot on this. Can you explain what this is?
Yeah, so talking earlier about a pursuit of your own identity and kind of making that into your own leadership style. So first is engaging in purposeful experiences. I actually kind of did this myself earlier when talking about really having a good voice and a good volume and inflection and being a very motivational person when speaking. You can refer back to that. The second one is putting that into practice. So actually making that happen and showing the others to actually do it. And then that kind of throws us into a leader of character. Yeah. So by owning it, engaging it, and practicing it, that's kind of what makes you your own leader as far as having your own character within that leadership.
Yeah. I know when we talked about like that first step, which is you're owning it, like the pursuit of your identity, always your attitude and effort go into that, because how much work you put into stuff and how your attitude is for just doing simple tasks that you may not want to do. Also your duty, because you may get a job or something you may not like. Obviously, we have different jobs every semester in the wing. We've probably had a job we don't really enjoy that much, but you still have to put that work and effort into it to help build that own identity. And your commitments, because we all have commitments, so that also shows how our identity is. And then finally, I think and then when you talked about the second stage for engaging, you obviously talked about your purposeful experience, and we talked about obviously being loud and having a voice with energizing dialogue. We have to kind of assess, challenge, and support those experiences, because we don't want to stay compliant when where we are. So we want to continue to grow as a person. You never want to just stay where you're at.
I'll say that's my favorite thing about being in this program over the last 4 years. So a little bit of background about myself, actually. I'll kind of hit back a little bit. My first few years in college, I wasn't in the ROTC program. I was a part of just engineering. And then after that, my junior year, so my third year, I decided that I wanted to join ROTC. And then I have been in college for a total of 6 years now.
That's too long.
A little bit. But 4 of those are ROTC, 2 of those are not. For my first 2, I will say I was really like C's get degrees focused. I was just kind of getting by. It was just kind of like, okay, going through the motions. But then once I joined ROTC, my favorite thing about that, the biggest selling point actually being inside of it, was you can develop yourself to any extent. That's what I've committed myself to for these last 4 years. Once I learned that, and once I kind of realized that asking other people, throwing yourself at adversity and seeing kind of how you react and how you can develop yourself after that. Of course, Air Force is huge on debriefs. Even debriefing yourself and talking to other people and say, like, how could I do this better? I know you just watched that. I'm hooked. Now I'm addicted. That was really what got me into ROTC, and that's what sold me on it.
So that's kind of like that second step of engaging, and now we're kind of doing that practice where our habits and thoughts and actions kind of reflect back that. How can you apply what you've learned from your one seminar into AFROTC and just being a good leader in general?
I would say that the biggest leadership lesson, not really that I've learned, I've always kind of had this in the back of my head, but being able to hear this that's from all over the country, and to be able to hear this from the proctors that we had, was you are getting into something that's really bigger than yourself. That means a lot. What I mean by that is you have so much responsibility to not only yourself, but
also national security and everything else when you decide that you want to join. The enlisted that are joining underneath you, and even as you grow as an officer, the other officers that are coming underneath you, they're reliant, their career, their family, their everything else is reliant on your decisions. Not only that, but the outcome of whatever we may be doing, whether it's counterinsurgency or if we become near peer, the result of that war is reliant on your decisions. So there is so much that is reliant on your experiences and your leadership style that you develop over the years, that you really, really need to throw yourself at as much adversity that you can, because the only way that you can really grow is if you are facing those challenges head on. You can't just think that you know what's going on. You can't just say, yes, I understand the key concepts from this class that I learned. You really have to kind of put yourself to the test and see that how you do. And if you're failing at something, or if you think that you can do something else, even especially, I shouldn't say even, especially if someone else thinks that you should be doing something better, you need to focus on that and you need to grow yourself, because there is so much on the line. And I think that's the biggest thing, going back to gravity of commitment, is because there is so much relying upon you going in as an officer of the United States Air Force.
You obviously said like adversity is super important. That was kind of one of my key takeaways, because I now have this understanding that adversity is literally the same thing as challenge, and I should face it head on just like I would everything else, because it changes your perspective and it helps you grow. So a lot of these points in these webinars honestly overlap, because a lot of the stuff I learned in my first webinar ended up circling back around to my last webinar, which was really weird to see how that all worked together.
Yeah, and I would say for me, the beautiful thing about kind of becoming an AS400 is becoming a senior. There's a lot of things that you learn over the last 4 years, but you really don't start putting it together until at first your 300 year, but your AS400 year, that's where things really come together. Being able to like kind of put pieces together is great, because you start to think you have a better understanding. And obviously you're not even into the Air Force yet. And then once you actually get in there, there's a lot more that you have to learn too. Second lieutenant, first lieutenant, I mean, you're still just kind of getting a grasp of the real Air Force. Now you're just getting a little bit of an idea of what leadership is like. And to be able to get a better understanding of what they're trying to teach us at this point is great, because now you try to take that in second lieutenant and first lieutenant years.
And then our final question is, what was one thing that stuck with you from the seminars?
I would say the biggest thing that stuck with me during the seminar was, there was a quote by Theodore Roosevelt that they pointed out, which was, and it's a large quote, but the main point that I really want to stick out is, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out the strong man who stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, whose errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. So I would say, especially between our two PDTs that we discussed, the main similarity is going to be adversity. So facing that adversity and growing from that is the biggest part from the PDTs that I think we really both learned from. And this quote, that's kind of why this quote in particular stuck with me. Because if you're looking on the outside in, it's very, very easy to kind of point out what you're doing wrong and why it's wrong. But to have gone through it is a whole nother story. When you're trying to develop yourself and you're throwing yourself at adversity to grow, that's huge, because you're going to make mistakes. But it's those mistakes in particular, which is why you grow. Yeah. And that's why it makes it so hard for us. But we really need to challenge ourselves to become better leaders.
Agreed. One thing that stuck with me is, before we went into breakout groups, he had us write down what integrity meant to us. Obviously everybody put honesty, having moral principles and stuff. So he goes on to the next slide, and it's just this picture of a boat, and he just stares at this and he's like, okay, can you guys tell me what this is? And I'm like, it's a boat. And he's, yeah, but what's the difference of this? And he said, you see how this boat is staying afloat? That's the integrity of the boat, and that's how it's staying afloat. And he goes on and it's like, integrity is not just being honest and having moral principles. It's about how you are made up as a person to keep yourself going and keep yourself afloat, in a sense. and which almost blew my mind because I thought that was so weird to bring a boat analogy, and I never thought of integrity like that. It's like how you are made up is also your integrity, not just, being honest and having moral principles. So that was one thing that really stuck with me. Maybe it was just because the boat was on a pretty lake. I don't really know. But thank you, Cadet Hagen, for joining us today and talking about our virtual webinars that we had through United States Air Force Academy. If you guys have any questions about any of our topics that were covered in our webinars, please reach out to me or Cadet Hagen. I know we would be happy to continue the conversation. Okay, Aircats, remember to fly, fight, and win. And I'll catch you next time on Aircasts.